And thanks for coming out. I want to thank the library, first of all, and Dalhousie for the invitation. And I need to say a big thank you to the Riddell family who are such champions of the award that I received, but also just an incredible, lovely group of people who I was already probably going to faint when I won the award, and then I started crying because they were so nice. They handed me a copy of his memoir, and they had told such lovely stories. One of the ones I'm just going to share with you today, because it just made me, I was thinking about it on the way up, was his one son talked about being a kid and being the son of a writer and what it's like to, when you come home from school, I think he said, if you could hear the typewriter, it was a good day. If you couldn't hear the typewriter, you knew it wasn't a good day. And that way that being a writer affects the people in our lives. They told some beautiful stories that night. So I want to thank the Riddell family for sure. I'm going to give you guys the option, actually. Having said, you said I would read from this. The problem with Entropic as a collection is they're all incredibly long stories. I don't know what happened. I have an attention span issue, as you described, but apparently not when it comes to short stories. And so they're difficult to read from. I end up having to kind of do a kind of cliffhanger kind of reading with them. So I can do that with, I think Blink is a good one to do, which is the first story in the collection. You can then go on the internet and Google Blink and my name, and there's a film version of it. So you could actually check that out if you want. I don't like the film version, but it's there. I will put a plug in. There are now film versions of The Beautifully Drowned and, sorry, The Beautiful Drowned. It's been changed to The Beautifully Drowned, totally different. And Chiaroscuro are both got film versions that I suspect will be hopefully in the Atlantic Film Fest here in the fall, so watch for those. In the first collection are much more smaller pieces, and so we could do a little taste test of things, and we can kind of have little samplers of a few things. Or the third option is, because I was talking about family, there is a story in here, quite gothic, which for some reason most audiences are a bit horrified by, but my brother and my mother laugh all the way through every time I read it. So we could have a little bit of adaptation, we could have a little bit of tapas, short stories, is that a way to put it? Or we could have family. Anybody got any preferences? No preferences?
Let's hear a little bit from
Crisp, that was the one that I was going to read. That's the family one. Okay, so Crisp is the title story from the first book. It's the one that, yeah, I think somebody's jaw fell open when I read it when I launched in Fredericton, and then I launched in Victoria and read it to my mother and my brother as a bedtime story the night before the launch, and they were just laughing. So dark people, my family. So right, I just gotta remember where the story is. Okay. It's Tuesday, and our father has packed the trunk of his rusty blue car. I'm 7, my brother Randy is 5, and we're both standing on the porch. What neither of us says out loud is that we're relieved. We watch him load the last of his stuff into the car. The lamp with the tassels from the living room, and his dining room chair, the one with the arms. Now there will be only 3 chairs left. I think to myself that the lamp and the chair are signs he isn't coming back. He's taking everything he could need. Then I see a storm in the south bunching up where the highway and the horizon meet, and I worry this is a sign he's going to stay. I tetherball back and forth this way. Randy stands and stares. He grips a rock in his right hand, and I wonder if he's going to throw it. I say nothing to him. I'm not a very good older brother. Mom pushes the screen door open and stands between us. Her left hand is over her mouth. Her right hand props her elbow to keep her mouth in place. I can hear the thunder now. I want to call to Father as he opens the door, say maybe he should wait out the storm, but he nods before I can and gets in. The car shudders, a plume of blue smoke erupting towards us on the steps. He doesn't wait for it to warm up, just backs up, Then the car moves forward and away. His left arm reaches out the window and waves a slow wave. Thunder again, and I look up to the rain suddenly falling on my face. The storm here already, like it just remembered it should rain and is making up for lost time. She starts to cry then, our mom. Maybe she thinks the rain will hide her tears, the telltale red of her run-ragged eyes. Or maybe she doesn't care. We watch him drive the half-mile to the end of the driveway, driving into the storm. The clouds mud-gray and the lightning cracking in the big sky. His car stops at the highway. He doesn't signal. The car idles long enough for me to think maybe he'll turn around and come back. Maybe he's thinking about Randy and me. How we need a father. 1,000, 1,000. What's he waiting for? A bolt of lightning rips through the air above the highway, smites father's rust-pocked blue car, and it explodes as the gas tank turns electric. Mother's hand flies off her mouth, and she lets out a strange animal shriek. She starts to laugh, everything tumbling out of her mouth at once. She'd been nagging him for weeks to get the gas tank fixed. It was leaking gas everywhere. The back seats, the carpet, they were wet with it. So it could have been the car cigarette lighter that pops clear of the dash when amber hot, but I prefer to think it was the lightning, that God had something to do with it, because only God can smite things. Mom's face clenches red and raw in the rain, the laughter spilling out of her a little angry, then a little sad, then a little angry, and on and on. I see Randy look down. Yellow liquid runs down Mom's legs from her short denim shorts. She's peeing herself, a yellow puddle foaming around her bare feet on the deck. The rain's falling harder now, splashing the urine. Randy looks like he's going to say something, but I give him a full-force look. I give him the look that he and I both understand means just look at the horizon, look at the smoldering metal of our father. We are rocks, Randy, just look at the horizon. What if he's still alive? I take a step forward, a lurch. He's dead, says Randy. He's burnt to a crisp now. But my feet are staggering forward. I start to run, my bare feet numbly hitting sharp gravel on the muddy driveway, and I'm running the long distance to the highway, to the burning wreckage. I run to see for myself, and I run partly to get away from the word crisp. Randy is smaller than me, but he can outrun anyone. Halfway to the highway, halfway to the burning metal skeleton, he tackles me to the ground. My palms burn from the gravel, but the mud soothes them. He doesn't say anything. I know he's right. There's nothing to see in the car. Miles away in town, we can hear the fire engine's siren. They must have seen the explosion. The firefighters arrive in a flurry of trucks and hoses and yellow hats. They stand around and talk about what to do, whether the rain's got it covered or not. They tell us to go back to the house. They call a tow truck, but the car won't stop burning. They stride to the porch where Mum stands. The rain has washed away the urine. They must think she's just wet from the rain and the tears. It doesn't look good, says one firefighter. The others nod. They think it's the rubber in the tires that keeps the car burning. They don't really know. Randy glares at them. I see he's still holding the rock. Our mum has a strange love for rocks. She talks about it sometimes, where she thinks she got that love. That summer when she was 17 and her little sister was 15, the same distance apart as Randy and me. That summer, they drove all over the place in my mom's Volkswagen Bug. It was an old one, the kind with the running boards, and the last owner had broken the mechanisms for both the windows. So everywhere they went that summer, they baked in that car and had to drink tons of water. But they never had to pee, as they just sweated it all out. Mom always said that part like she was offering a handy tip. The one time, they were driving up some dirt road thinking they might find some swimming hole where they could go skinny dipping. The road they drove on was strange, though, and the sides of the road started to rise, and the road itself began to narrow. Her sister thought they should turn back, but my mom decided they should keep going. Rocks scraped against the undercarriage, and the trees crowded in closer, branches dragging along the windows. With a grinding shudder, the car lurched to a stop. My mother's sister turned and looked out the back window and could see where they'd gone. Could see that this wasn't a road after all. The stones were too rough, the shapes not flat enough. This was a riverbed, a dry riverbed. The stones on the side had narrowed until the car was wedged and could go no further. They had to back up for miles. They backed into the first side road and found themselves beside a burnt bridge and a real river. My aunt pulled the latch, but her door wouldn't open. My mother tried too. Hers wouldn't budge either. I told her to throw her shoulder into it, my mother said. But from that, all we got were two bruised shoulders, one apiece. In a flash, she wondered if they would die in that car. They honked the horn and yelled and screamed through the stuck windows. They had a little water left, a few mouthfuls. Then there he was, a river god of a man, all curly hair and cut-off shorts. He smiled at them. He pointed to the bottom of my mother's car door, laughed and hollered through the glass. Your running boards are all bent up. My mother shrugged, a playful shrug, a what can you do shrug, giving him plenty of room to be their savior. He found a big enough rock and broke her driver's side window, using his shirt to pull out the few shards of glass still caught in the door, so the two sisters could climb out. They swam together that whole day in the sun, and he taught her to skip rocks across the slow, lanky river. At the end of the day, the sisters climbed back in the driver's side window and drove away, waving to the river god. When she tells this story, I sometimes ask about him, see if I can get her to describe him more. I think he's the most beautiful man in the world. But I also have this feeling in my stomach like slipping in the tub as I see the look in her eyes like she wants to be somewhere else. Like she wants to go back there. It's my favorite mom story because she squints funny when she tells it. Like she's closer to it for squinting. And in her eyes you can see she is closer. She collects flat rocks wherever we go, but there's no place to skip them here. The lakes are far off and the gully's too small. A few days later, one of the firefighters comes back. He says he's come to check on our father's burning car. And then later, another, and then other men. In the days after Dad exploded, many men come around. The ones who nod before they close her bedroom door, and the ones who don't look at me after they ask, is your mother home? Randy and I sit in the kitchen and eat cereal. I ask him if he thinks it's weird that there are so many firemen in our town. He shrugs his shoulders. Maybe we have a lot of accidents. He's acting sullen. There's a knock on the screen door. It's another firefighter. Is your mother home? Randy slumps over further in his chair. The man walks down the hall to our mother's room. Her moans begin again. My little brother Randy watches a lot of nature shows. He says animals communicate through noise, that a baby's cry can make a mother's breast leak milk. I ask him what about a mother's cry, and he says he hasn't seen anything about that. I gotta go someplace, says Randy, and he's out the door. I'm not a very good older brother to Randy. I mostly read superhero comics and lay in my bed. I don't play ball with him, never learned to spit without spraying everywhere, and he's always been the one who protects me. I watch out the windows as Randy orbits, throwing rocks so they nick the boards that hide the trailer wheels. He does this every time a man comes over now. I learned to cook. I cook all the time. I learned to cook, not just heat up things from cans, because we can't just eat cereal, and because I have to be some kind of older brother to Randy. I learned to cook with raucous, banging pans and slamming cupboards, all the while singing songs that don't exist. Randy comes back for the food, but also because he can't hear Mom's moans over all my noise. This is how I will be an older brother. Mom doesn't come out of her room except to pee, and then she sometimes walks the length of the trailer and stands in the door to the kitchen in her thin nightie, her breasts and other stuff filling up the trailer. She smells of Old Spice and the ocean. It's a small trailer. We live pressed in on one another this way. My brother and I both nod, and then she says, "Cook yourself something to eat. I have to sleep." She shuffles down the hall and back to her bedroom. Then the men stop coming around as much, though a few still come back again and again. There's this one, a potbelly like it's full of worms, a cartoon red nose, and Randy throws rocks at him like he's a stray dog, but he just laughs and still runs for the house. A month after Dad exploded, the car stops smoldering, and Mom starts to swell, quickly. On Monday, we think she's retaining water. On Tuesday, we think she's pregnant. She starts to cry. All the time, but she doesn't get any smaller with the water loss. The men stop coming around. Randy takes to orbiting the trailer again, further out in the fields and along the sewage ditches, so he can't hear her crying. I take up cooking more loudly. She's swelling. In the morning, she calls me in and asks me to massage her legs. I ask her if there's money anywhere for food. She says she doesn't think so. She's run out of nylons, so I rub warm tea leaves on her legs to steep them a darker color. The men like this, she says. They'll come back now, she murmurs. In the bathroom, I rub a small handful of tea leaves on my leg. The stain is peculiar. I wonder if it stains the flesh, too, or just the skin. It's hard to tell how deep things go. Days later, she can't get out of bed at all, and the mattress sags, giving up a little more each day. She stops going to the bathroom, pees into a pot I bring from the kitchen, stops eating, and still she swells bigger. Randy walks to town and gets a doctor from one of the clinics. The doctor comes and opens a window in the room, even though Mom will make me close it as soon as he leaves. She says mosquitoes keep getting in and they give her nightmares. The doctor tells us she needs rest. He tells us we should get out of the trailer and give her some quiet. He knows what boys can be like, but tells us we got to take good care of our mother. I ask the doctor if she will keep growing. His head shakes slowly from side to side. He says women are a mystery. I ask how big she will get. He says he doesn't know. I keep thinking of Alice in her Wonderland, drinking from the wrong bottle. This one makes you big. A week later, Randy and I can't get into Mom's room any longer. Her left leg sticks out of the bedroom door, so we can't close it. We have to climb over it like a fallen tree to get to the bathroom. We don't know where her right leg has gone. When she talks now, we have to listen to the wall, place a glass against it, and then holler back so she can hear us. It doesn't matter. She doesn't want anything. Soon the aluminum sides of the trailer are bulging in the heat. At night, Randy and I sleep in the yard in tents we make with blankets and the three chairs we salvaged from the kitchen. There are two small windows in her bedroom, each the size of a television. In one, I can see her hair, her black, shiny hair. In the other, we can see only one of her eyes. I think it might be the left one. But she's so bloated and her eyes so large and the window so small, we can't tell. During the day, I lean a sheet of plywood against the side of the trailer to block the sun so she won't be blinded. Randy and I sit in the dirt and shade below the window, our backs to the aluminum trailer, feeling it shudder and creak under the weight of her breath. She stopped talking, but still, we listen. The firefighters come around again. It doesn't look good, they say. They're no fucking doctors, says Randy. He heard one of the firefighters use the word, and now he uses it in every sentence. The doctor comes around again. It doesn't look good, he says. He leaves. He ain't no fucking firefighter, says Randy. The firefighters park a truck by the house and take turns hosing down the trailer. They say she must be cooking in there. The word crisp burns on the roof of my mouth. We're going to end up with two parents cooked. But there's nothing the firefighters can do about Mom's expanding. I think they just want to hang around and see what happens next. At night, I take the board away from the window so Mom can see the lights of the town stretching to the horizon. I like to think she can see the stars, but it's a little too bright so close to town like this, and I don't know what she can see. It's a Tuesday night when Randy and I are wandering out in the knife grass, and he looks at me, the air crackling static between us. We run back through the grass to the trailer, stand and watch the bulging sides of it. The walls seem still, quiet, not vibrating with her breath the way they were. Down by the burning car, the firefighters have built a fire. That's fucking weird, says Randy. We go around to Mom's bedroom window. Her one eye blinks slowly. Something's happening. Maybe she's just tired, I say. Randy brings around two dining room chairs, and we sit facing her. I think it makes her happy that we're there. I look at Randy, and I hardly recognize him. Used to be when there was nothing to do but sit around, he'd go apeshit from boredom. You know, Mom, he says to her one big eye, you know the animals know when there's going to be an earthquake, and they run for higher ground while the people stay around and get drowned. Fucked up, eh? Mom's eye grows wider. Sorry, Randy says, looks down at the dirt. Didn't mean to curse. I can't stop looking at her eye. I don't say anything. I have a hard time talking to her now. I think it's because her eye doesn't focus anymore. It reminds me of when we were smaller kids, and Mom took us on a road trip to the coast to Sealand, and I was standing next to this one tank trying to find the orca. And the water was just black slate, clouds reflecting. And then there he was, floating right in front of me, quiet and calm, his one big eye watching me. I was caught in that black glass, seeing him seeing me. Scared, but not because I thought the thing was going to eat me. Scared because this one great eye was looking at me, and I didn't know what he saw. There in the back behind the trailer, sitting in front of Mom's window, the crickets out in the dark field, and the smell of something barbecuing on the firefighters' fire, I try to think of something to say to Mom. I can't. We're mostly water, Randy once told me. Sometime around midnight, the aluminum sides of the trailer give way, and Mom's skin does too, like a water balloon on the pavement. With a creak and a crash, the walls split and crumple, a great wave of Mom's insides and torn parts flooding out into the yard. Randy and I are knocked back off our chairs. The wave sloshes and puts out the firefighters' fire as they knock over their lawn chairs and jog away laughing, kids playing in the waves. There in the gore and rubble, Randy looks at me, close to pleading. I don't recognize the look at first. It's a little brother look. The firefighters call people on their cell phones. One of them throws up in a pool of Mom at his feet. That seems disrespectful to me. That's when Randy grabs a handful of rocks and starts to run after the firefighters. He hucks rocks at them, hits one in the head, cracking a startled scream out of him. Another stands his ground, holds out his broad hand and says, "Now look here, son," just before the next rock hits him in his front teeth, cracking one clear off. Then they're all running down the road to the highway. None of them thinks to grab the fire engine, so Randy just starts to throw rocks at it, smashing all the windows, the headlights and taillights. One of them tries to come back for it, but Randy sees him and a rock glances off the guy's temple before he starts scrambling back down the road. They come back for the fire engine when we're at school the next Monday, but it doesn't matter. The damage is already done. Woof. I haven't read that for a while. It was intense for me. I don't know how you guys usually do this. Do you have time for a couple questions, or? Sorry? Okay. It was nice to meet you. Do we have time for a couple questions, or?
So is this one going to be a movie?
Actually, one of my business partners wants to. There's a Halifax animator, and I'm forgetting her name right now. She's in the Atlantic Film Fest every year. She's a wonderful animation artist. And he really likes the idea of this being half animation, live action, and playing with that. So it may. So every year at the festival, he talks to her, and it moves a little bit forward. So we'll see. I like it never becoming a film, though, I think. I like it being the gothic thing in our heads, I think. So, yeah.
Writer's secrets or something, but was there ever a point while you were writing that you had to sort of hang it up for a bit and not quite sure where it was going to go?
Not that one. There are stories that are that way with me. There's one in the new book, actually, that was a play, and then it was maybe going to be a novel, and then it became more of a poem, and then it became a short story, and so it went through a lot of life before it found I think it found its legs in the end. So some of them just, kind of arrive, and some of them are laborious, require a lot of chewing. So, yeah. But it was one I think pretty well arrived. I think the mother's story grew into it later. Initially, the first draft, I think, was just the kids. But I really, the first book is really very much, for me, it's very much about kids stumbling into adult worlds and not having a vocabulary for them, and how it becomes almost unspeakable, I think. So I really liked, I think that's that sort of tendency in us to, when we hear stories about when our parents, before they were parents, and when they were actually human beings. It's a little, I love that part of it, so. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So when you write your stories, do you have like a location in mind? So do you think like Atlantic Canada, for example, or Nova Scotia, is that important for you, or is it more like not?
It depends on the story. That one for me is a prairie story, which is weird because I never grew up in the prairies. But there was something when I went to a writer's retreat there once, Sage Hill, and it just seemed like, I'm using the word gothic a lot today, but it seemed like a very gothic landscape. Everything about it seemed slightly horrifying. I hope none of you are from the prairies. I went for it was in a monastery, this writer's retreat, and I went for a run went for a run through the fields. I thought this would be not a farmer. I didn't really think about this, and they just threshed the fields. I don't know if any of you are from farms. There's nothing more gothic than a field after it's just been threshed. There's like body parts and dead animals, and like it's a dark place, and it was a very dark run, and so I'm sure that's probably where this story kind of sprung from that. So I don't know as much, I'm trying to think of much for the new book, but I'm from the West Coast originally. So there is I think particularly in the first book, there's a lot of rain. And the funny thing as a writer is, and having now moved to the East Coast for the last kind of 8 years, is my general impression is that people here have a very different experience of rain. I don't know, my colleagues at University of New Brunswick tend to hide under their desks after 2 days of it, and don't like it, and I grew up with it and I miss it. Like I long for rain. I'd take it over cold any day. So it's what?
They fear it to turn into
I bet you that's what it is. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's a very different. When you grow up with it, it's the same thing. If people that grow up in the prairies, they long for that clear prairie sky. But when I did grad school in the prairies, and when the sky is clear in the winter, it means it's like 15 degrees colder. So that was not a happy thing. Didn't signify for me that way. So East Coast is coming up more in the stories now, I think after 8 years of being here, I'd say. So I don't know. I think that what's more significant in the new book is more kind of places of high density of population. And what I was really interested in is kind of the way that, in a more subtle way in that collection, the way that people, I love watching, any of you from big cities? I feel like it takes even the most benevolent person about 5 minutes in Toronto before they're almost pushing somebody down the stairs in the subway. That way that we objectify and no longer humanize each other in big cities, and yet have these very separate existences. So that I think that kind of runs through, and that requires a setting of, we don't really have that happen in Fredericton, not much. So I think that's how setting kind of plays into it a bit more. Yeah.
You tend to write about your experiences, or are these completely like thought off? Like, you have a little brother, he's Chuck Ross.
Yeah. I have the thing about putting a book out, some of you are writers, and so you have this experience probably, but it's different when you're a magic realist writer. Some of these are more magic realist, and when you write a book and you put it out in the world, suddenly people that would normally never read a book suddenly feel obligated to, right? Because they're your friends. And so I had this one friend who was a computer scientist. I don't think he'd ever read a book of fiction, ever. And I would get a phone call every 3 nights. I just finished this one. Is that true? Did that happen? And it's like, yes, my mother expanded to the size of a trailer until it exploded. So I had to walk him through it a little bit. But it is, but there's truth in it. So for me, it's very much a story about my little brother, who's always seemed like a bigger brother to me. Like, I'm 3 years older than him, but he's just got his gravity in the world in a way that I never felt I did. So it was a bit of a tribute to him. My mother would go to book launches with that first book and say, I never had as much sex as the mothers in that book. I wish I did. So there's truth, there's lies, there's, I think the spirit of it, the brother part, is kind of what's really truthful for me in there. So, but yeah, it's always a bit of both. So, yeah. My poor mother. Yeah.
You mentioned magic realism, and of course I thought of it when the situation with your mother. Do you use it a lot in your writing? And just can you talk a little bit more about magic realism in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless, I would have been attracted to absurdity. I mean, I just think that's the way I see the world. I like when things are very uncomfortable. So even I don't know, sorry, writer amnesia. I don't even know if I would call, yeah, there's a couple of more magic realist pieces in this one, in the new one. And the rest are just a little uncanny or a little absurd. And I would have probably, that would have been my disposition anyway. That's why my mom and my brother would laugh at that story at bedtime. That's the line of people I come from. But I think the funny thing is that where I grew up, and this is really apparent in the kid story, in the more kid perspective stories in the first book, where I grew up in Prince Rupert in a village nearby. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the West Coast, like Emily Carr's paintings, where like Emily Carr painted that way because the landscape was so overwhelming. And that was very much the landscape of my childhood. Like it was like, when I went, there's a weird way that I went to the Amazon rainforest at one point, actually when I was finishing this book, funny enough, and I felt so at home because the sort of insane lushness of a jungle. I mean, they're both rainforests, but in, what do they call them? What's the distinction? Temperate, tropical versus, yeah. And like, you know, in the trailer park I grew up in was surrounded by swamps and everything was alive. Like just everything was, you know, moss was on everything, mold was everywhere. And I remember reading about kind of I don't know how true this is, the assumption that magic realists sprung out of the kind of colonizers in South America overwhelmed with the landscape and trying to find words for what was almost unspeakable in what they were finding. And I really I think I over-identify with that in the sense that I think I'll probably to my dying days try to tell the story of that landscape and give people that experience I had as a kid that they may never get. So I think it's a very similar place it springs from for me. I think that's led to other stories. I think that's given me a tool set for other stories where I feel like I can kind of, in Blink, the one I mentioned from the new book, the first one, it's a guy that discovers that his perfect girlfriend has a editing suite hidden in the walls of their apartment where she's been editing out all the stuff she doesn't want him to see about her. It's the one that has the bad movie version. And within it, it's moved away from kind of, it's become a tool set for something else there, I think. It's that way of taking the small things we do and kind of zooming in on them in a way that's uncomfortable, I think. Yeah, so. But yeah, I feel bad when I say magic realist because I feel like that really does not sort of do service to everything that is magic realism, but I relate. So, yeah. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with magic realist writers, or like Gabriel Garcia Marquez is one of the most famous ones, and in 100 Years of Solitude, when the general dies, if I remember this correctly, his blood runs like 100 kilometers to his mother's house, runs up the stairs, and makes the milk on the stove go bad. Like, you know, and he's got, yeah, I think I was particularly inspired by his short stories, like and Amy Bender, the American writer, yeah, he's a horrible writer to read though. Like you can't read him while you're writing because you want to write like him and only he can write like him. So he's got a very particular way of writing. But Amy Bender, I think she's got a story called The Giver, and it's a woman whose boyfriend is devolving. And every day she wakes up and he's kind of lower down the food chain. And it's a really beautiful story, actually. But I remember when I first read that, I kind of went, oh, this is possible. Suddenly there's this way, like it just kind of made me realize there was a whole set of paints on the palette I hadn't been thinking about. So, yeah. So, yeah.
The writing is so visual. What happens when you make films? Is there any dialogue? Or is it just...
That's funny. That it's what? It's funny because I have a production company with two friends, and we produce each other's films so that we don't have to wear producer-director hat at the same time. And we've got a bit of a reputation now in the province for making films that don't have much dialogue. So you're right. They're very sparse in dialogue. And it's hard when we have a film festival there, and I think they assess screenwriting based on dialogue when they give out the award. And I think it's hard for them because they get 5 lines in a 30-minute film. So it's, you know, it's tough for me. I think one of my big obstacles as a director is I see the film before we shoot it, and there'll sometimes be a visual that I can't let go of, that I'm determined we will get, and we may never get it. And there's a certain point in any given shoot I find where I have to give up. But I think that's true in short story writing too, or in story writing, is there's always some scene you're madly in love with, and then it's inevitably the one that has to get cut. You know, I think that's kind of the horrible paradox. So, but it is, I think it serves me as a director, but it also it's a bit of a disservice at moments. So, but I've got a few tricks now that I do to, I borrowed this, have you ever seen Amélie, the French film? Junet, the director's name is Junet, I think. Forgetting his last name. He takes a photograph of every shot he's going to do in the film before he does it, and I do that now. So I have them on boards, and I just point at them. That's what we're doing now, and it's a way to get those pictures out of my head and be able to communicate them with people. So it doesn't mean we get them all. That means we often have to cut them. But yeah, it's funny because I think people think that the filmmaker informs the visual aspect of the writing, but I think it's the other way around. So, because I think I was always a story writer long before I ever thought of making films. So, yeah. All right. Sorry?
I think you're a storyteller.
Oh, thank you. I come from a long line of them. They're monstrous people. So if there's no other questions, thank you so much for being an audience to the Gothic today. So.